James Warren Jones started as a preacher in Indiana in the 1950s, and on the surface, he seemed like a genuinely good man. He welcomed black and white members into his church at a time when America was still deeply segregated. He fed the poor, visited the sick, and preached equality. Local politicians praised him. Newspapers wrote glowing articles about him. Nobody looked too closely, and Jones grew bolder. Inside the People's Temple, things were very different. Jones staged fake miracles, paid actors pretending to be cured of cancer. He preached for hours in the middle of the night, forcing exhausted members to listen. Members were pressured to report on each other. If you showed doubt, you'd be publicly shamed in front of everyone, or physically beaten while the congregation watched. And slowly, quietly, he stripped away every member's ability to think for themselves. By 1977, journalists were starting to ask hard questions. Former members were talking. Jones knew the walls were closing in, so he ran. But he took nearly 1,000 people with him. He had been leasing a stretch of jungle in Guyana, South America, and he called it Jonestown. He described it as a paradise, a socialist utopia free from racism and American greed. Families packed everything they owned, elderly members sold their homes. They boarded planes with hope, with excitement, with total belief that something better was waiting on the other side. What was waiting was a work camp. Armed guards at the perimeter, passports confiscated. The PA system broadcasting Jones's voice around the clock, paranoid, rambling sermons at 3 a.m. And then there were the white nights. Jones would sound an alarm in the middle of the night, gather everyone in the central pavilion, and announce that the end had come. He'd hand out cups of liquid and order everyone to drink. Members would sob, say their goodbyes, and swallow. Then Jones would laugh, tell them it was a test. The liquid was harmless. But the message was clear. When I tell you to drink, you drink. He ran those drills again and again, until it felt almost normal. November 18th, 1978. In November 1978, U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan flew to Jonestown after receiving desperate pleas from families back home. The first day seemed fine. Jones staged music, food, smiling members. But that night, several residents slipped notes to Ryan's delegation, begging to leave. By morning, a group had openly asked to go. Jones let them. He couldn't afford to look like he was holding people prisoner, not with cameras rolling. But as Ryan's group boarded the planes with their freed passengers, Jones sent armed guards to the airstrip. They opened fire. Congressman Ryan was shot and killed, the only sitting U.S. congressman murdered in the line of duty in American history. 3 journalists were killed. Others lay bleeding on the tarmac as the gunmen drove away. Back at the compound, Jones gathered all 909 of his followers. He told them the American government was coming, and they would not come peacefully. Revolutionary suicide, he called it. The cyanide had been mixed in Flavor Aid. Nurses moved through the crowd, injecting the babies first, because they could not drink on their own. Parents held their children as they went still. Some adults thought, some wept, some simply drank. Because after years of white night drills, after years of having every independent thought taken away, they did what they had always done. 909 people died on November 18th, 1978. 303 of them were children. When investigators arrived the next morning, they found bodies spread across the entire compound. Many were holding hands. Jim Jones was found near the podium with a single shot to his head. To this day, nobody knows for certain whether he pulled the trigger himself.
Marshall Applewhite was a music professor in Texas before everything changed. In the early 1970s, after a series of personal failures and what he described as a near-death experience, he became convinced of something extraordinary, that he was not actually human, that his soul had been sent to Earth from a higher evolutionary level, which he called the next level, specifically to deliver a message and eventually return home. He found a partner in a woman named Bonnie Nettles, and together they began traveling the United States, holding small meetings and recruiting followers with a message that was strange but somehow compelling. Human bodies are just containers, temporary vehicles. The real you exists beyond this physical world, and the way to get there is to follow us. By the 1990s, the group had settled into a rented mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, an affluent suburb north of San Diego. There were 39 of them. They ran a website design business, they cooked meals together, watched Star Trek, exercised, and waited. From the outside, neighbors found them polite and professional. Inside, Applewhite taught that human emotion, desire, and even gender were lower-level concerns to be discarded. Several male members had voluntarily undergone castration to prove their readiness to transcend the physical. They did not drink, did not form relationships, and avoided anything that might attach them too strongly to this world. They were preparing. They were always preparing.
In 1995, astronomers announced the discovery of the Hale-Bopp comet, one of the brightest visible from Earth in decades. It would make its closest approach to the Sun in April 1997. And then, in late 1996, a rumor spread across the early internet. An amateur astronomer had photographed something anomalous near the comet, something that looked, if you squinted, like a structured object, a craft. The astronomer himself clarified almost immediately that it was almost certainly a background star. Blurry image, consumer equipment, imperfect conditions. Mainstream astronomers dismissed it instantly, but the rumor had already escaped. And for Marshall Applewhite, it was not a rumor at all. It was confirmation. This was the moment everything had been building toward. He recorded a series of farewell videos, calm, almost joyful, and looked directly into the camera and said, "I'll be the first to tell you that this transition, this graduation, is not a sad event."
March 26, 1997. A former member received a package in the mail, videotapes and a letter saying goodbye. He called the police. Deputies arrived at the house on the afternoon of March 26, 1997. The front door was unlocked. The house was silent. Inside, 39 people were dead, lying on their backs on bunk beds and cots throughout the mansion, each one covered from the waist down with a purple shroud, each one wearing identical black trousers and black Nike trainers. Beside every body was a small packed bag with a few personal items, as if they were waiting for a flight. They had died in shifts over 3 days, phenobarbital mixed into pudding, washed down with vodka. The healthier members cared for those who went first, then took their own doses. The last 2 had no one to remove their plastic bags. They were found still wearing them. 39 people, ages 26 to 72, former military veterans, a retired postal worker, a former nurse, a one-time rock band roadie. Several had been with Applewhite for over 20 years. They had given up careers, families, and decades of their lives. And in the end, they packed their bags, lay down on their beds, and waited for a spaceship that never came. Every single one of them believed, completely, without reservation, that they were going somewhere better. That is the most disturbing thing about Heaven's Gate. Not that they were crazy, but that belief, built carefully enough over a long enough time, can completely replace reality.
The Order of the Solar Temple didn't look like a cult. It presented itself as a philosophical society descended from the Knights Templar, exclusive, sophisticated, and expensive to join. Its 2 leaders were Luc Jouret, a Belgian homeopathic doctor and gifted public speaker, and Joseph de Mombro, a wealthy French-Canadian businessman. Jouret recruited, de Mombro controlled the money and the mythology. Membership fees ran into the thousands. Members included doctors, lawyers, politicians, and business people across Switzerland, France, Belgium, and Canada. You didn't stumble into this group. You were chosen for it, or at least that's what they made you believe. At the heart of their teaching was a belief about death, that it was not an ending, but a transit. When members died, de Mombro taught, their souls would travel to a star in the Sirius system and be reborn as solar beings on a higher plane. Death was not something to fear. It was the entire point. And that belief, embedded quietly over years, repeated in candlelit ceremonies, normalized until it felt like obvious truth, is what made what came next possible.
October 4, 1994. One night, 2 countries. It began with a baby. Tony and Nikki Dutoit were long-standing order members who had recently had a son, 3-month-old Emmanuel. De Mombro, who had long claimed his own daughter was a special cosmic being, became convinced the Dutoit baby was a rival. He declared the infant the Antichrist and ordered his death. On the night of October 4, 1994, Emmanuel Dutoit was stabbed to death with a wooden stake. His parents were murdered alongside him. The house was set on fire. At almost the same moment, on the other side of the Atlantic, events were unfolding at 2 locations in Switzerland. In Cherry, a farmhouse had been converted to include a secret underground chapel. Inside, 23 people dead. Some shot, some injected with drugs, some possibly willing. Ceremonial robes, candles, timed incendiary devices reduced the building to ash. 40 kilometers away, in Grange-sur-Salvan, 25 more bodies were found arranged in a circle, dressed in robes, the same evidence of incendiary devices beneath the floors. Demambro and Giray were among the dead. 53 people. One night, 2 countries. The world woke up the next morning to news that barely seemed real.
It wasn't over. 14 months later, in December 1995, French authorities found 16 more bodies in a forest clearing in southeastern France, arranged in the shape of a cross in the snow, dressed in ceremonial robes, most shot in the head before being set to fire. Among the dead were a police officer, a civil servant, and their families. Some had recently transferred large sums of money to the order. Some had told loved ones they were going on a spiritual retreat. And then in March 1997, the same month Heaven's Gate made headlines in California, 5 more members died in Quebec. 3 of them were teenagers. They were the children of 2 of the adult members, killed by their parents before the adults took their own lives. The youngest was 16 years old. Investigators found evidence that she had struggled, that she had not gone willingly. 74 people total, 4 events, 3 countries, 3 years. The investigators who worked these cases described them as among the most complex they had ever seen, not because the evidence was hidden, but because the line between choice and murder was almost impossible to draw. Some had written farewell letters, some had left instructions for their estates. Others had been drugged, restrained, and killed without any real chance to say no. These were not desperate or vulnerable people. They were educated, wealthy professionals with every resource available to them, and they still ended up in a burning farmhouse in Switzerland or in a snow-covered forest in France, dead before their time.